a comprehensive look at trends, fund profiles, and more in Exploring ETFs.
Hi everyone, welcome to Exploring ETFs. I'm Neena Mishra, and today we are talking about best and worst performing ETF areas of the first quarter. Now, the first quarter was quite challenging for stocks because it was hit by multiple headwinds, including rising inflation, tighter monetary policy, and then the war in Ukraine, and supply chain disruptions continued. So in fact, this was the worst quarter for stocks since the first quarter of 2020, that is when COVID hit initially. But the last 2 weeks of March saw an impressive rebound. So let's see whether that continues. In terms of performance of the indexes, the Dow, S&P 500 and the Nasdaq were down 4.6%, 4.9%, and 9% respectively. It was a bad quarter for technology after many quarters because tech stocks had been outperforming for the past almost a decade. But this quarter, energy was the best performer. Energy surged 38%, and utilities was a distant second best performer, up about 6%, and those were the only sectors in the green for the quarter. Financials was almost flat. For commodities, it was the best quarter in more than 30 years. And we know that commodities were already benefiting from rising inflation, and the war in Ukraine just supercharged that rally. And for bonds, it was the worst quarter in more than 40 years because interest rates were rising. Looking at the ETF areas that did very well, nickel, oil and gas, those were the areas that did very well. Now we know that Russia is a major producer of nickel, and this metal is a key element in electric vehicles, EVs, and also in stainless steel. So the demand for the metal had been rising because rising demand from EV producers, and after the conflict and supply chain disruptions, the prices just went haywire. And a giant Chinese nickel and stainless steel producer reportedly had a short position from hedging, and that short covering on one particular day led this metal surging more than 70% in a day, and the London Metal Exchange had to suspend trading in the metal. Russia is also the world's second largest producer of natural gas, third largest oil producers, and European countries, they were heavily reliant on Russian gas because they transitioned to green energy. They reduced their investments in fossil fuels over the past few years, and they were importing a lot from Russia. In fact, Gazprom, the Russian gas giant, supplied more than a third of Europe's gas needs. So gas prices also went on a wild ride. Oil prices also surged because of the war and supply chain disruptions. And we saw that late last week, President Biden announced the release of about 1 million barrels of oil per day from strategic reserves. So that sent oil prices lower after that report, but then oil prices had risen again this week after Europe announced that they are considering new sanctions on Russia. Now let's take a look at the best and worst performing ETFs by going to code pages on Zacks.com. So the nickel ETF is ticker symbol JJN. This invests in nickel futures contracts, 45 basis points expense ratio. This is up about 60% year to date for reasons that I mentioned. Now, the thing to remember is that this is an exchange traded note, an ETN. You can go to the quote page on Zacks.com, and from there the external home page, and you will see what it currently holds, and you can also see the volatility in performance. The second one that I'm highlighting is also an ETN, and this has about 21 million in assets. This is even smaller, up about 55% year to date. So again, you can go to the quote page on Zacks.com, and from there the external home page. Again, this is also very volatile, as you can see. So these are basically trading instrument, and you should also remember that these are exchange traded notes. And recently, Barclays suspended creation in two popular exchange traded notes, and that led to a chaos in their trading. So investors should always remember that exchange traded notes are not exchange traded funds, and they should be dealt with more carefully. The third one that I'm highlighting is an ETF. It is an S&P 500 Oil and Gas ETF, ticker symbol XES. And this is an equal weighted ETF. Again, you can go to the quote page on Zacks.com. It holds oil and gas equipment and services companies, and you can go to the quote page, and from there the external home page, look at the holdings and other details. You will see that these are almost equally weighted, so a lot of tilt towards smaller companies too, in addition to bigger companies like Halliburton. So that is one of the reasons why this ETF did well. Now, I also wanted to quickly show the worst performing ETFs. Russia ETF was one of the worst performing because Russian stock market basically closed after the war started. And if you go to the iShares webpage, you will see that it basically lost all its value because these stocks were deemed uninvestable by the major index providers, and they were kicked out of the benchmarks by index providers, including FTSE Russell and MSCI. So Russia ETFs basically went to almost zero. Among other worst performers was the ARK ETF, the ARK Innovation ETF, which was one of the top performers in 2020 when these stocks benefited from COVID. But last quarter was pretty bad for these stocks. And if you look at the top holdings, Tesla is the top holding, almost 10% in the ETF, and Tesla was actually flat during the quarter, and since then it has been doing quite well. But despite Tesla being the top holding, other holdings were so bad that the ETF also was one of the worst performers during the quarter. So on the next slide, I have the comparative performance of all these ETF areas, and you will see that the nickel ETF was up about 60%, as I mentioned. The oil and gas ETFs up between 45 to 50%. The S&P 500 index was down about 5%. Cathie Wood's ARK ETF, that fell almost 30%, and another ETF, Psychedelics ETF, was also down about 35% during this period. On this last slide, I have the comparative performance over the past 1 year, and you will see that the nickel ETF was up about 110%. The gas ETF was up about 100%. The Spider Oil and Gas ETF up about 44%. S&P 500 index up about 14% during the quarter. No, it was up about 15% during the quarter. And Cathie Wood's ARK ETF was down more than 40%. the Russia ETF down more than 80% over the past 1 year. And I haven't included the psychedelics ETF here because that was basically a new ETF. Thanks for watching. Make sure to check out zacks.com/promo for an interesting offer, and I will see you next week.